Philadelphia's National League Park, also known as the Baker Bowl, after Phillies president William Baker. Although the investment group that Baker headed, well, they owned the Phillies, but they didn't own the ballpark. The ballpark was owned by an investment group out of Chicago, and it's this disconnect between the ownership of the stadium and the ownership of the team that created a lot of problems. Certainly, as the Baker Bowl was first constructed, it was considered a marvel of modern architecture. But after decades of neglect, the baseball stadium had become quite dilapidated. By the 1920s, it became common for fans who were coming and sitting in the upper deck to bring an umbrella. And that's because if a foul ball had hit the roof, that meant debris was going to come raining down on them. Now, a disaster had happened at the Baker Bowl in 1903, which cost 12 people their lives. And you would think, with that in its history, the ownership of the stadium would understand the need to keep it up. But an event that occurred on May 14, 1927, well, it revealed the neglect of the owners of the stadium. And it was quite a tragic event.
Welcome to Philadelphia Baseball History. On this channel, we talk about the history of baseball from the A's to the Phillies to the 19th century. And sometimes we talk about contemporary baseball issues. So if you love baseball and if you love Philadelphia, stick around and subscribe to our channel. How do you show your home team pride? With mugs, t-shirts, masks, phone cases, tote bags, and so much more. Check out tpublic.com and search for Philadelphia baseball history. Phillies fans had reason to be optimistic in mid-May of 1927. The Phillies had gotten off to a strong start. They had a winning record and were in a tie for third place, 2.5 games behind the Giants. On May 14, 1927, the Phillies were set to begin a 3-game series against the St. Louis Cardinals, and fans who came to the Baker Bowl that day were in for an offensive treat. Early in the game, the Phillies were taking advantage of the Cardinals' miscues. They were translating errors into runs that had taken an early lead. But after the Cardinals came within 1 run of the Phillies' lead in the top of the 6th inning, the Phillies' offense exploded in the bottom part of the inning. The Phillies sent 13 men to the plate and scored 8 runs. This offensive onslaught was fueled by 2 hits by catcher Jimmy Wilson and a grand slam by first baseman Russ Whitestone. Phillies starter Hal Carlson then proceeded to try to shut the Cardinals down in the top of the 7th. After shortstop Tommy Thievenow hit a pop foul to first base, the pitcher's spot came up. And then the rains came down, and the fans in the front row of the lower deck began seeking shelter by moving up to the seats that were underneath the overhang of the upper deck. You see, when the Baker Bowl was built, it was a marvel of modern baseball architecture. Among its impressive features was that it was the first baseball stadium built with a cantilevered design. This means that it used weights on the upper deck in order to secure the upper deck without using the support beams that obstructed the view on the lower deck. In fact, you can still see old stadiums in use that have these obstructive poles, for example, Wrigley Field and Fenway Park. The grandstands were also roofed, which offered protection from the elements from the upper deck as well as those in the lower deck. Well, except for the fans in the front row of the lower deck. They were sitting out beyond the overhang of the upper deck and didn't have the protection of the roof. And while the left field side had bleachers that were exposed to the elements, on the right field side, the grandstand had been extended over the years and now covered all the seats down the right field foul line out to the wall on Broad Street. And while the stadium was the first to be built with brick and steel, well, the owners, they were negligent in the upkeep. Indeed, just a quarter century before this, a balcony on the left field side had collapsed into the street and had killed about a dozen people. But the stadium owners, they did not learn their lesson. Indeed, matters were complicated by the fact that the stadium were owned by a different group of investors than the investors that owned the Phillies team. And that investment group was based in Chicago, not Philadelphia. In fact, the Phillies, they were locked into a 99-year lease of the Baker Bowl. That meant that in theory, the lease would extend out to 2010. In the area of the grandstand that had been extended out into right field, there were wooden support beams under the seats. Over the years, these support beams, well, they rotted. So when the fans started crowding underneath the upper deck overhang in order to escape the rain, well, the rotted support beams, they could no longer hold the weight of all those people. The support beams gave way, and the seats came crashing down in two sections along the right field line. The fans were in a panic, and to escape the fact that the seats were collapsing, many of them ran onto the field. This caused the game to be suspended due to the calamity. In all, about 50 people were injured in the stadium collapse. No one at the stadium died from the crash itself, but one fan, well, in all the rush and pandemonium, he suffered a heart attack, and he later died at the hospital. The stadium owners were of course sued, and the Phillies were forced to lease space from the Athletics at Shibe Park, which was just a few blocks away. For the next 11 home games, repairs were being made to the Baker Bowl. But this calamity, it wouldn't be the end of the Baker Bowl. The Phillies continued to use that rundown stadium for another 11 years before moving permanently to Shibe Park in 1938. In fact, the bad stadium deal was one of the reasons given for the Phillies' financial problems of the 1920s and the 1930s. The Phillies had a tough time filling seats, which meant they didn't have the money to pay for more talented players. And since the Phillies couldn't field good teams, well, that fed into the cycle of failing to attract more fans. Eventually, the situation got so bad that in 1942, the Phillies couldn't afford to send their team to spring training. Instead, they had to borrow money from the National League in order to continue as a going concern. Eventually, at the end of the season, the National League bought the team. And we have a video on the story of whether the commissioner of baseball blocked Bill Veeck from buying the Phillies in order to staff the team with Negro League stars back in 1943. We'll have a link to that video in the description box below. Eventually, the team would be sold to the Carpenter family, who brought a competitive Phillies team to Philadelphia and won a pennant in 1950. But back in 1927, well, the Phillies' woes would continue for another few decades. So now it's your turn. Tell us what you think. Leave a comment below. Tell your friends about us. Don't forget to subscribe. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. If you have any ideas for topics that we can cover in the future, please let us know in the comments below. If you would like to see more of these videos, please consider becoming a patron through Patreon. Again, we'll have a link in the description box below.